Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alexey, and today I have a special guest, Dan Malsch. Dan Malsch is a highly respected mixer and audio engineer who known for his attention to details and deep passion for music production. Dan Malsch has been working with such great rock and metal musicians as Ghost, Gojira, Avenged Sevenfold, Doro, and many more. In our today's interview, we're gonna be talking with Dan Malsch on mixing the latest album of Ghost, which is called Skeleta. Skeleta album of Ghost was mixed by Dan Malsch and Andy Wallace, and the album was mastered by Ted Jensen. And also in our today's interview with Dan Malsch, we will have one more special guest, Besma Jabbar, who is mixing assistant of Dan Malsch, and also she worked on Skeleta album of Ghost with Dan Malsch, Andy Wallace, and Ted Jensen. It's a huge honor to have you on my YouTube channel today, Dan Malsch and Besma Jabbar. And let's start our interview. How you became a sound engineer?
My two older brothers were in a band, Walter and Joe, and they used to have a setup in the garage. And I would go in the garage and mess all their equipment up, change stuff around, move microphones around, mess with the mixer. I was probably about 11 years old. So I was always very attracted to the sound audio part of recording, even as, I don't know, 10 or 11 years old. But what happened was I was in a band called Wicked Mariah, metal band back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And we had a chance to record in a bunch of different really great studios. One was Morris Sound Recording in Tampa, Florida. And they had an SSL 4K there. And I remember being very attracted to the SSL 4K. I would ask the engineer, producer, Jim Morris, if I could do some recalls for him. And that's how I became, that was kind of the bug. And I was going to go to school, but maybe Full Sail or something, but I had gotten some advice to just buy some gear and just start recording some bands. And that's what I did.
My next question is how you got into mixing rock and metal.
So I've been a metalhead forever. Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Dio. It's almost like that's all I could get into. I do mix a bunch of styles of music, of course, but I think rock and metal comes, it's something that I hear very easily what it should be, power, aggression, clarity. I don't think I could have, with what the style of music I was listening to as a kid, it was all metal, some rock. I mean, I love rock. I was listening to like Journey and stuff like that. Anything with a lot of melody, but all the bands I was listening to I was a big Priest fan. Like I said, Ronnie Dio. Yeah, that's how I got into metal.
How you started working with Ghost?
Yeah, so Ghost, that came from Andy Wallace originally. And the first record we worked on together was Impera. I'm blanking on the year now. I believe it would have been 2022 or 23, maybe. But Andy had called me and said, "Hey, you want to work on a project together?" And I was like, "Sure. What's the band?" Ghost. I was like, "Oh, I love Ghost," because I was a big fan of, especially the song Rats. I probably listened to that a couple times a week. So yeah, it was originally through Andy Wallace.
The latest album of Ghost, Skeleta, was mixed by you and Andy Wallace. Can you please tell me about your work with Andy Wallace on Skeleta album?
So we originally mixed Skeleta in the summer of 2024. Andy and I did it together like we usually do. I'll usually start out the mix. I'll get the Pro Tools sessions from the engineers and producers. I'll put the mix on the console, which is an SSL 4K in my studio, and I will get the song to where I think it's basically finished. And then Andy will come in and put his touch on it, which is a little different EQing, just basically what Andy's hearing that he either doesn't like about what I have, or he just wants to enhance or change to his tastes. So the album was done in the summer of 2024. And then in November of 24, I get a call from Ghost manager Kristen that they want to make some changes on the album. That ended up being basically changing the entire album. So I was originally trying to find a 4000, an SSL 4000 studio to work on in Stockholm, because Tobias wanted me to come to Stockholm rather than Tobias come to my studio in Pennsylvania. I couldn't find a studio with an SSL 4K, but I did find one with a beautiful duality. And I'm glad I did, because I met Besma and went to a great studio. But the issue with the duality was there was no recall. We couldn't recall anything we did on the 4000. Andy and I did in the 4000. So we basically started on the first song, Satanize. Me, Besma, and Tobias were in the room, and we all thought it came out great. And then so we decided to treat all songs on Skeleta through the duality, because it was sounding quite a bit better than what we had done in Pennsylvania. For one of the reasons was because Tobias was in the room with us and he could make changes. You know, it's a little easier when Tobias is in the room. But, you know, and I also think the duality enhanced the sound of Skeleta, a little more open sounding than my console. My console's a little grittier sounding, but I think Skeleta was better served with a little more open, transparent sound. But maybe Besma could add some stuff, because you were there. Why don't you tell me what you think?
Well, yeah, I was there. So you guys came in on November 11th to start mixing the Ghost album. And
the details. You have details. Yeah. That's good.
I've got the details. Yes. So I remember like the first day you came in, we were kind of like setting up the first song, Satanized. We started mixing. So we set it up on the desk, made sure all the plugins were installed that you needed. So we went from there, basically.
Yeah. And the issue was the not having any recall from a 1986 SSL 4000 to a 2020, whatever the duality is, a very new duality. So I originally started out saying, I need to match the mixes that we had in Pennsylvania. But I think I remember saying, we matched the mixes, but I think it could use this, and this now. A little brighter, a little clearer in the bottom end. Maybe the original mixes were a little too overdriven, kind of what I think. And the main thing was having Tobias in the room to make changes that he wanted to make. So the album is completely remixed.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was it was interesting because like it sounded great when you started, but then like it took a completely different direction basically after we set it up on the desk with the first song. And yeah, Tobias came in. I think he heard you mix the first, like the Satanized song, and then he was asking if you could mix all the other songs in a similar way.
Yeah.
After that.
And the interesting part was, not to dwell on this forever, is we only had 10 days booked, and 10 days turned into about 2.5 weeks. So luckily the studio was available, or you made it available, which thank you for that. And
no worries.
It was a great experience.
Yeah, it definitely was.
Yeah.
So you are a professional sound engineer who has Grammy nomination and Billboard #1 hits in your career. But have you learned anything new on mixing from working with Andy Wallace?
I guess a lot. You know, not nothing really technical. I'm a very technical mixer. I study. I would say I'm a audio engineer in the truest form. Techniques, what compression does, what reverb does, what delay does. I don't know how much I would have got from Andy with that. But I think what I learned from Andy was Andy has a lot of confidence. Andy has, he knows what he wants. He goes for it. And he's also a very good balancer. He balances. He listens at a very low level. And he's very, very detailed even with hi-hats and cymbals, and this tom 1 is not as loud as tom 3, and he's very detailed with the little elements. But I think why we get along is we work so similarly to start off with. So I can't say there's too much I learned from Andy other than, obviously, Andy is a legend. He's mixed so many great records. His demeanor is great. His studio etiquette is great. He's a super nice guy. And how he deals with clients is really, really good. Because you would think, the legend Andy Wallace wouldn't take kindly to mix revisions or changes. It's actually quite the opposite. Andy will be overly accommodating for clients. So I think really it's more personally, I think Andy's a great guy. And I think I learned some balancing techniques that he does, some compression techniques that Andy does, but mostly just on a personal level. Work with Andy has been a good experience. Technically, I mean, everyone kind of knows what there is to, everything's available on the internet, and everyone has access to the same gear. Well, I mean, not everyone has an SSL console, but everyone has access to all the same plugins. But it just comes down to taste. It comes down to how you hear how a song should be treated. And my approach, I can't help but to be super detailed. I can't help it. I have to look at every aspect of every part and everywhere, every drum hit, every bass pluck, every guitar chord. It's just, maybe it's OCD. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but whatever it is, I don't think you're ever going to say that Dan Malsch mix is muddy. I don't think so, because I'll figure out how to figure that out. Sometimes maybe too much, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I don't think it's too much.
How Skeleta album was mixed? Did you mix song by song or all songs in one project?
Yeah, so when I'm mixing on the SSL 4K, the old automation is a total recall automation. If we're mixing on that console, it has to be song by song, because to recall the older 4K, it takes quite a bit of time. I mean, we can probably do it in about a half an hour, but does it actually come back exactly how it was before? Not totally. It's got a lot of character. It's like a vintage car. Sometimes it doesn't start. Most of the time it starts. But sometimes one EQ sounded great the day before. The next day it sounds like it doesn't sound so good. Now, with the duality and the Stockholm mixes, we were able to go back and forth from song to song, because Tobias would want us to work on a song for, say, an hour. Okay, that song sounded really good. Bounce me a reference mix, or bounce me a mix I'll listen to tonight. Let's go to the next song. Maybe we'll work on that song for 2 or 3 hours. Let's burn a bounce a copy of that. I don't know why I'm having a hard time with burn or bounce. We're not burning CDs anymore. And so with the duality, we're able to recall the console in 10 minutes. Batsman would be on the right side, I would be on the left side. So we could go back and forth from song to song, because I'm not using a lot of outboard gear when I mix. I'm just completely on the console. The console's enough. It has EQs and compression. EQ and compression. I don't need to reach for 1176s or special EQ, but I do have a very particular master bus that I do use, that I didn't have in Stockholm. Mixes still came out great, but I do have a particular master bus that I do use. I could mention that if you want to hear what it is. It's on every mix that I do.
My next question is, what is your approach on making ghost drums sound good in the mixes for Skeleta album?
So when tracking, I have a wall full of analog gear. Neve mic pre is everything you could possibly want. But when I'm mixing, I always have an analog side to the mix. It's usually on the SSL 4000. Sometimes it's on my Neve summing mixers, depending on what the project is. And I'll use very specific analog gear for my master bus, which will be, it's been the same for a very long time. It's an SSL Bus Plus, which is a compressor. It's a DW Fern stereo tube compressor, which is a BT7, and then a Better Maker passive EQ. Those are always on my mix bus. So I'm always printing through that chain. Now, everything else is plugins. I have no problem using plugins. It's mostly your standard, your 1176s, your LA2As, and it really doesn't matter the manufacturer. They're all pretty good at this point. I have lately been using a lot of IK multimedia gear, like the T-Rax. Their 1176 is nice. I've been using their classic clipper. I do reach for universal audio gear a lot. There are a couple plugins that I love. Obviously, Soothe. We're all using Soothe right now. I'm using a lot of Fab Filter EQs, and I'm using, because I'm an SSL guy, pretty much if you look on every channel in my Pro Tools session will be some kind of SSL EQ, mainly because I like the sound. And I could also use SSL 360 because I have the SSL controllers, and I can control the plugins like I'm working on a console. Because like Besma said, I'm not really looking a lot of time. I'm just turning knobs, and I can do that with SSL controller. So when I'm tracking, all analog, I'm still using real amps. I have nothing against modeling amps because I use those too. But a lot of real amps, old tube amps, new tube amps. But when I'm mixing, once I have the Pro Tools session, I'm not inserting any analog gear other than the master bus stuff I talked about. And I'm either mixing on the SSL or 32 channels of a Neve summing mixer.
How bass tone was created for Skeleta album?
So bass tone for Skeleta. Bass tone for Skeleta is very, very unique. I love the bass tone for Skeleta. So I know there's an SVT cabinet, a classic SVT heading cabinet. There's a DI, which I'm putting a bit of distortion on the DI, which is usually a rat pedal, which is a plug-in version. Sometimes I will just overdrive the channel of an SSL plugin, and I'm beating up the DI pretty heavily with an 1176, and I'm cranking like a high mid, like 7K, 2.5K, just to have the clunk from the DI, and I'm getting more roundness from the bass amp. And then there is a stereo bass channel that has a kind of like an SPX 90 on it, but it's a plugin. I can't recall the plugin right now, but it's doing a wide stereo. And that actually a lot of times is brought in louder for the chorus. So when the chorus pops in, the bass, all the guitars open up wider, but we still have the solid guitar, the solid bass guitar right up the middle. Because if it just goes wide, then there's nothing in the middle. The mix kind of falls to crap. So we just widen it. I try to get, I think Bess will agree because you commented, I try to get the widest mixes in the world that it can't get. If I would figure out a way to get it wider than the widest you can get, I still haven't figured that out. But I want the mixes to be as wide as can be, but still have the punch in the middle.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I find that really interesting with your mixes because I was listening to a mix you did, and then all of a sudden the vocals or like harmonies came in like very wide. I was like, wait, I'm not sitting in a Dolby Atmos room. This is actually stereo. So that was really cool. It's very effective.
And what I'll do sometimes to make it happen is I'll make the verses narrower. So when the chorus comes in, it appears to be even wider. But I am doing some special secret sauce things to make a lot of little things to make the tracks really wide.
What was your approach on mixing guitars for Skeleta album?
I love the guitars on Skeleta. So I think I think the secret is out. That some of the guitar tracks were actually a Tom Schultz Rockman from the 80s. Now, that's actually one of the reasons why we started doing the remixes in Stockholm, because the Rockman guitars were pushed a little too out front because they're very thin sounding, but they have a really nice mid-range cut. But especially like a song like Lacrima, if you listen to the intro of Lacrima, the guitars sound really big right now. But the first mix is the Rockman's pushed up too high, so that the intro is a little thinner and kind of like needly sounding. So there's a series of Rockman guitars. There's a Marshall Plexi. There's a pitch down guitar, which we called wah guitars. That are not actually wah guitars. They're just used to pitch the guitars down real low with the wah. I forget what the red wah pedal is. Forget what it's called. But the guitars are pitched down really like goom, 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 goom. So those are in the mix a lot more now in the Stockholm mixes. And then a series of different amps. There's a lot of rhythm guitar tracks on Skeleta, but there's a blend of, so for instance, I'd have 3 different buses. One of the buses would be called main guitars. So they were kind of a little more mid-rangey, normal, like Marshall-y sounding guitars. The other bus would be those needly like Rockman guitars, really like earpiece piercing, but they would cut really nice in the mix. And then the other bus would be these really heavy, it's called whammy bus, but that would be the real thick guitar. So think of 3 separate buses of guitars, but within those buses, there could be 6 or 8 tracks of guitar. So many tracks of rhythm guitar.
How did you put Tobias vocals in Skeleta album mixes?
So I could talk about the vocal chain. I'll give away a couple secrets. The vocal chain Tobias's vocal always has a decapitator on it from Sound Toys. So it's offering a little bit of an edge, but also brings up the low mid a little bit. So even if you just put decapitator on a vocal and don't put a lot of saturation or distortion, you could bring up the low mid thickness in a vocal. So we'd start out, first we'd start out with a fab filter plug-in, just rolling off some of the bottom end at maybe 80, high pass of maybe 80 hertz. And then always a combination of 1176 and LA2A 1176 first. And these are all plugins. But I think for the Ghost album, they were mostly Universal Audio plugins. But I did mix a couple T-Rex plugins also. So 1176 is medium attack, fastest release possible. And I have no problem creaming the compressor. It could be 10 dB of compression. As long as it sounds good, it's fine. And then the LA2A is not doing much compression at all. It's just for the roundness of the LA2A. And then I'm still using an old school LA, Waves plugin, the old L2. I have L2 on all of my vocals. And I know some engineers frown upon that, but I like it particularly on Tobias's vocals. I actually like it on most vocals. And then I'll take the separate vocal tracks into a bus, and then I'll treat them together, usually with Soothe for my de-essing. And I'll also use another de-esser on the individual tracks. And then a lot of automation. I'll use clip gain also if I can't, because I'm working in Pro Tools. I'll use clip gain on specific words. And then I'll use a lot of automation. I do a ton of rides.
How did you prepare mixes from Skeleta album for mastering by Ted Jensen?
Ted is amazing. I like using Ted, especially on the Ghost mixes. I mean, I shouldn't say on the Ghost business. I've used Ted most of the time, probably 90% of the time. I do like Mauer. Applebaum is also great. There's a lot of great mastering engineers, so I don't want to single anyone out. I just happen to work very well with Ted and Mauer. Mauer is also really great. So I'd say those two I use most often. So I always will have a fab filter limiter at the end of the mix because, the last plugin. Because when I send Tobias or whatever, if I send Ghost or whatever band I send their mixes, I can't have the mixes like -12 LUFS or -13 because immediately it's 5 or 6 dB lower than, commercially used records. And just when it's lower, it just sounds worse, even though you could just turn up your volume. But so I'm preparing the masters with the mixes with the limiter on. But when I send it to Ted, I'll just bypass the limiter and print a mix. But then I'll also send Ted what I call my loud mix. So Ted can compare what he's doing compared to what the band's been listening to, because he wants to know the loud mix that the band has been listening to. So Ted will get the limited version and the unlimited version. That was a little roundabout way of saying an easy limited and unlimited version, but that's the reason why.
Thank you so much, Mr. Malsch, for such a wonderful interview. It was a huge honor talking to you. And thank you so much, Basma, again, for joining us and for your wonderful and very knowledgeable answers. I really like your work on Ghost album because it sounds phenomenal. And I cannot stop listening to this wonderful masterpiece on music. And I wish you both all the success in this world. And you are super duper wonderful and you are super duper professional sound engineers. And it's a huge honor talking to you. And it's a huge privilege learning from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we keep making some more great records together.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Thank you so much, Alexei.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the interview and podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate this.